question: how do you know that the life you are living is, in fact, quote unquote, real? How do you know that you aren't, in fact, dreaming? After all, cannot dreams indeed be quite convincing? Such questions pertaining to the potentially uncertain distinction between dreaming and waking life lie at the heart of the classic play, Life is a Dream, by the renowned Spanish playwright Pedro Calderon de la Barca. A very stimulating work which is built around a pretty intriguing thought experiment, you might say. So, what is the story of Life is a Dream? Well, Basilius, king of Poland, has a son named Sigismund, who was, you might say, born under a bad sign. Not only did his mother die in childbirth, but strange astronomical happenings accompanied his entry into the world, and his father had a vision that if ever his son were to attain the throne, that he would become a tyrant and embark upon a bloody reign of terror. So, to avert this dire prophecy, Basilius had his son Sigismund locked away in a remote tower, and there he has remained for his entire life. But now, growing old and without any other progeny, Basilius has a change of heart and decides to allow Sigismund out of the tower on a trial basis. He will give his son the opportunity to succeed him as king if he can prove himself to not be the monster that his father feared he would be. But if he does prove to be the monster that his father feared, they will knock him out and take him back to the tower, and they will tell him that the entire experience was only a dream, that he dreamt the whole thing and never actually left the tower. So that's what they do. They knock Sigismund out via drugs and transport him to the court of his father, the king, where he awakens in princely opulence and is informed that he is the heir to the throne of Poland. But wouldn't you know it, he turns out to be a total tool. He causes a scene and commits some violence. And so Basilius is like, oh no, he's exactly what I was afraid he would be. Take him back. So they knock Sigismund out again and transport him back to the tower, which is his prison. And upon awakening, he is informed that nothing happened, that he dreamt the whole thing. It was all just a dream. None of it was real. And again, he never left the tower. But now that the citizens of Poland are aware that their king actually has an heir, they are intent upon seeing Sigismund succeed his father and become their rightful ruler. So some of them undertake to break Sigismund out of his imprisonment, and then they form an army for him, and he goes to war with his father, the king, seemingly fulfilling the prophecy which his father sought to avert, only to ultimately relent at the end and explain that it was the cruel treatment by his father which turned him into the villain they were all afraid of all along. It was a self-fulfilling prophecy kind of thing. And ultimately, Sigismund turns towards goodness and presumably goes on to be a righteous and worthy ruler. So that is the main plot of Life is a Dream. There are some subplots involving the line of succession to the throne, as well as some jilted lovers, but again, that is the main plot there. So let's break this down and talk about the technical qualities of this work. So this is a play, which means that the entire thing almost is dialogue. There's no narration or description other than just stage directions and basic scene setting. But I gotta say, the dialogue in this is pretty good. This is, I believe, from roughly the contemporary era of Shakespeare. This is a very old work. But, you know, even though the language can be kind of hard to, you know, grab hold of at times, kind of hard to grasp, especially because this is also in translation as well. Nonetheless, some of these soliloquies in here really are pretty grand, especially Sigismund's reflections on dreaming after he awakens back in the tower, having briefly been allowed out. Some of these soliloquies actually are pretty good, and it's sufficiently grandiose. It's sufficiently grandiloquent. It's got that classic old timey theater kind of loftiness to it. So it can be kind of hard to grasp at times, perhaps, but I think it's fine. It's a pretty well written work as far as plays go, I suppose. So let's talk about the characters. This is a pretty interesting work character wise because the main character Sigismund is pretty complex. I mean, he grows up and lives his entire life up to a certain point in isolation, almost in imprisonment, and when he's let out, he seemingly is a dick, but then by the end we realize that it is the cruelty towards him which has made him into such a dick. Again, it's this kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy thing. But he ultimately changes as the story goes on from being a dick to being a good person. So he has an arc kind of, and it works as well. His father Basilius has some depth to him as well because he is ultimately driven to treat his son very cruelly by his belief that it is of necessity. Otherwise, the kingdom will fall into tyranny and a bloody reign of terror if he doesn't. But then by the end, he's like, maybe I was wrong. Maybe I shouldn't have done all this. And come what may, I'm going to face it head on. So he also kind of has an arc as well. And overall, the characters in this are pretty memorable. I think again, the entirety of these characters is conveyed pretty much through the dialogue and the soliloquies, the monologues. But I think it's pretty good, honestly. I think they are pretty memorable, if nothing else. So I would say it's a pretty good work in that regard. Now on to the actual story that this play tells, because it is interesting and it is a very intriguing thought experiment again that this play is built around, and it really does provide some pretty good food for thought. It kind of, to me, kind of prefigures later stories like, I don't know, maybe The Matrix or something, where life also is something of a dream. But also in this work, we see a kind of rejection to a certain extent of the classical Greek notion of fate, because fate and free will, the conflict there between, is a central theme of life as a dream, because what instigates Sigismund's imprisonment is the vision of his father that he will become evil and do bad things. And then that prophecy is seemingly fulfilled at the end, except Sigismund then reveals that what made him be that way was his father's cruel treatment of him, which was, again, instigated by this prophecy. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy kind of thing. I like that. I think that's a really great little twist to a story. But as we know from classical Greek theater, fate was a very prime preoccupation in ancient Greek theater, like Oedipus Rex, right? Oedipus Rex is the story of a man who is given a prophecy, who seeks to escape that prophecy, but ultimately realize that you can't escape fate, that fate is final, and that all attempts to escape it are futile. But De la Barca, writing in a later era, in a Christian era, seemingly endorses the Christian concept of free will. That there may be forces acting upon one to be a certain way or be a certain thing, but ultimately the decision is one's own, whether one conforms or rebels against those forces. And we see this at the end where Sigismund relents and turns away from being the tyrant that they were afraid he would become, and explains that it was his father's cruel treatment of him that made him be that way, and that he's not going to be that way anymore. He will be good. So he ultimately overcomes his supposedly predestined fate. So it's got some interesting thematic material within it as well. But the main theme of this work is the notion of dreaming and whether or not one can uh, successfully distinguish between dreaming and waking life, and the kind of implications that this notion bears with it. And the characters in the play explain to Sigismund when they're giving him his little princely trial run. They're like, "You better act right, because you might just be dreaming. Who knows? This might not even be real. You better act right." And then whenever he wakes up in the tower again after being re-imprisoned, he's explaining what he saw, what he dreamt, quote unquote. And they're like, "Well, you should have been good. You gotta always act right." And this kind of lends itself to certain theological notions, where life itself perhaps may be likenable to a dream, and death may be akin to something of an awakening. And so it always behooves one to be on one's best behavior, because one is never certain whether they will be judged for their conduct. And so, again, it's just such an intriguing little thought experiment that this play is built around, and it's so stimulating. And again, I think it kind of prefigures uh, certain later stories, again, kind of like The Matrix. But yeah, it's a very memorable work, and this was actually a reread for me. I'd read this play some years ago. But how would I rate Life as a Dream? I would give this an A minus. I would. I think it is a roundly fantastic play. Um, but there's something that happens at the end after Sigismund has his kind of like come to Jesus moment, and explains himself. One of the side characters, the soldier who freed him from his imprisonment, is like, "What do I get for letting you out of prison?" And he's like, "Your ass gets imprisonment yourself. That's right. You are going to be locked up in that tower for treachery against the king," which is very confusing, or can be very confusing. And I think that people have interpreted this differently, of like a condemnation of treachery, even if it is ultimately for the service of good. But others, I think, have interpreted this as uh, the author, Pedro Calderon de la Barca, kind of displaying fidelity to monarchy, and loyalty to the king, because he was writing in a monarchical age, and he did not want to perhaps portray any subversive sentiments in his work. But that can confuse modern readers, perhaps, and it perhaps can come off as kind of callous, and perhaps somewhat undercut the transformation of the central character by the work's end. But uh, overall, this is, again, a roundly fantastic work, and one that I find just incredibly intriguing, and just thought provoking, and I could really recommend it. So yeah, Life is a Dream will get an A minus from me. So Life is a Dream by Pedro Calderon de la Barca. Have you read this play? If you have, let me know down in the comments what you thought about it, whether you have agreed or disagreed with anything I've said about it here today. And if you haven't read Life is a Dream, I would definitely recommend this. If you are a fan of theater, like classical theater, like Shakespeare era, again, I think theater, pick this up, because this may not be as well known as something like Hamlet or King Lear, but it really is a great little work, and one that is, once again, just very stimulating. And as always, if you have enjoyed anything you've seen or heard here today, remember to hit that like button and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. And until next time, peace.